I think one of the saddest things about the modern world, partly a result of television, is that people live in a tiny time slice of the present moment, which they carry forward with them, but nothing remains. And there's nothing in their experience which reverberates down the centuries, because the centuries to them are completely dark. Just unillumined corridors from which they stagger into the single little sliver of light. I suppose I would say that with Spinoza that the truth of our condition is very difficult to understand, and like everything worthy of knowledge, it's as difficult as it is rare, as he says at the end of the Ethics. We achieve understanding anew in every epoch, and it takes the greatest of intellectual and cultural effort to do it. This is what civilization is for, to achieve this self-understanding. But it does seem to be the case that no sooner has it been achieved and it's lost again, and that the knowledge that really matters is more easily lost than gained. We can gain easily piecemeal knowledge of this and that, and build up whole libraries of piecemeal knowledge. But the conception of the why and what of human existence dawns on people only at the apex of their endeavours, and once it has dawned, it is usually then eclipsed straight away by ignorance. And we are going through a period of eclipse. That is quite obvious. We're entering a dark age in which people know an awful lot of information, but very little coherent, holistic truth. And this has happened before, many times. But the wonderful thing is that it's still possible to gain a vision, to stand on a little peak, not perhaps the peak on which, say, Spinoza stood, or Plato, but nevertheless a peak of one's own, and look across at all this sea of ignorance and confusion and hysteria, and smile at it.
have written at one time and another some sentences which have surprised me a little about death. Now, in particular, I remember you've said that death is psychologically just as important as birth, and like it, it's an integral part of life, but surely it can't be like birth if it's an end, can it?
Yes, if it's an end. And there we are not quite certain about this end. Because, you know, there are these peculiar faculties of the psyche, that it isn't entirely confined to space and time. The psyche, in part at least, is not dependent upon these confinements. And then what? When the psyche is not under that obligation to live in time and space alone, and obviously it doesn't, then to that extent the psyche is not submitted to those laws. And that means a practical continuation of life, of a sort of psychical existence beyond time and space.
Do you yourself believe that death is probably the end, or do you believe that...
Well, I can't say. You see, the word belief is a difficult thing for me. I don't believe. I must have a reason for a certain hypothesis. Either I know a thing, and when I know it, I don't need to believe it. If I don't allow myself, for instance, to believe a thing just for the sake of believing it. I can't believe it. But when there are sufficient reasons for a certain hypothesis, I shall accept these reasons, naturally, and should say, we have to reckon with the possibility of so-and-so, you know.
Well, now, you've told us that we should regard death as being a goal,
yes,
and that to shrink away from it is to evade life and
yes,
life purpose.
Yes.
What advice would you give to people in their later life to enable them to do this, when most of them must in fact believe that death is the end of everything?
Well, you see, I have treated many old people, and it's quite interesting to watch what the unconscious is doing with the fact that it is apparently threatened with a complete end. It disregards it. Life behaves as if it were going on. And so I think it is better for old people to live on, to look forward to the next day, as if he had to spend centuries. And then he lives properly. But when he is afraid, when he doesn't look forward, he looks back, he petrifies, he gets stiff and he dies before his time. But when he is living on, looking forward to the great adventure that is ahead, then he lives. And that is about what the unconscious is intending to do. Of course, it's quite obvious that we are all going to die, and this is the sad finale of everything. But nevertheless, there is something in us that doesn't believe it, apparently. But this is merely a fact, a psychological fact. Doesn't mean to me that it proves something. It is simply so. For instance, I may not know why we need salt, but we prefer to eat salt too, because you feel better. And so when you think in a certain way, you may feel considerably better. And I think if you think along the lines of nature, then you think properly.
And this leads me to the last question that I want to ask you. As the world becomes more technically efficient, it seems increasingly necessary for people to behave communally and collectively. Now, do you think it's possible that the highest development of man may be to submerge his own individuality in a kind of collective consciousness?
That's hardly possible. I think there will be a reaction. A reaction will set in against this communal dissociation You know, man doesn't stand forever his nullification. Once there will be a reaction. And I see it setting in. You know, when I think of my patients, they all seek their own existence and to assure their existence against that complete atomization into nothingness or into meaninglessness. Man cannot stand a meaningless life.
My answer to the final edge question, which is what is the last question? John Brockman asked when the final year that he conducted the annual edge question.
And that is the annual edge question is?
He would ask like 200 people, many of them physicists or biologists or mathematicians. He would ask a question and they'd write an essay. And then every year he'd publish it as a book. And so I did that for 10 years. Finally, he got tired of it. And he said, okay, this is my final year. We've exhausted this. What is the last question? So this is the question that I asked. So,
does something unprecedented happen when we finally learn our own source code?
Now, nobody picked up on this, but that's what my concern is, which is what happens when the universe finally contemplates itself? When we are the first, like we're always worried about the AI becoming self-aware, a la Skynet. Okay, we are the AI. And we're about to become self-aware if we can figure out what our own source code is. So we are Skynet. To hell with this. We're going to mismanage this planet into Armageddon if we don't get some grown-ups into the room.